Two worlds, one you can see, and one that sees you. The supernatural realm is real, it's close, and sometimes it crosses over. When it does, nothing is ever the same. America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers, Marianne Paul, is here to take you straight into the shadows. This is Real Ghost Chatter. True tales from the other side. Let's begin.
I'm Marianne Paul, America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers. There is a castle in Normandy, France, that no longer stands. It burned to the ground in 1984 under circumstances that were never fully explained. But the records of what happened there, the diary entries, the official church documents, the published accounts, those survived. And what they describe is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of supernatural activity in the 19th century. This is not a ghost story built on whispers and rumors. This is a story with names, dates, and witnesses. A story that was formally investigated by the Catholic Church, whose officials looked at the evidence and declared it, in their own words, diabolically supernatural. This is the haunting of Calvados Castle. There is one detail in particular worth holding on to because it tells you something important about the nature of what was in that house. The thing inside knew exactly who to target. The castle stood in the Calvados region of Normandy. The castle was built in 1835, constructed largely from the stones of an earlier medieval castle that had stood on the same ground for centuries. The land itself had a history. Local stories spoke of a white lady drifting through the grounds, and old accounts mentioned a werewolf said to have terrorized people crossing the nearby common. These were the kinds of stories that accumulate around old land in old places, so they are easy to dismiss, even set aside as nothing but folklore. In 1867, the de Manville family inherited the Chateau. Monsieur de Manville was a sensible, well-educated man. He was not the kind of person who chased shadows or invented stories. He moved into the castle with his wife, Madame de Manville, their young son Maurice, and a household staff, their coachman Emile, their gardener Auguste, their cook Selina, and their maid Amelina, and then there was the abbey. He was the boy's tutor, a Catholic priest assigned to educate young Maurice. He was a man of faith, a man of learning, a man who understood his role in a household and took it seriously. He was also the person who, for whatever reason, was the thing inhabiting the castle seemed most intent on destroying. When the family first arrived, there were odd noises, strange sounds in the night, doors that seemed to move on their own. There was nothing alarming and nothing that couldn't be explained away as the sounds of an old building settling in the dark. It was enough to cause mild concern, but not enough to act on. Then in 1870, the noises stopped entirely. 3 years of quiet. The family adjusted. Life at the chateau became comfortable, even routine. And then, in October of 1875, the sounds returned. And this time, they could not be explained away. On the evening of October 13, 1875, the abbé came to Monsieur de Manville with something troubling to report. He was pale. His hands were not steady. He explained that he had seen a chair in his room move across the floor on its own. Monsieur de Manville was a practical man. He went to the abbé's room, pressed a strip of sticky paper under the chair leg to hold it in place, and told the priest to let him know if anything further occurred. That night, the entire castle shook. Loud, violent blows struck the walls from inside. Not the settling sounds of an old building, and definitely not the wind, finding its way through gaps in the stone. These were deliberate, powerful impacts, loud enough to wake everyone in the house, strong enough to rattle the chandelier in the dining room. Monsieur de Manville and his servants searched every room, corridor, and floor. They found nothing. The blows continued night after night. Sometimes they were focused in what the family called the green room. Sometimes they moved through the castle as if something was touring the halls. knocking on every door before the sounds centered themselves again. Witnesses noted that the abbey's door always received the most attention. More knocks, more force. Like something in the house was looking for him specifically. By the end of October, the sounds had escalated. Something was running up and down the main staircase at what Monsieur de Manville described as superhuman speed. The footsteps were heavy, irregular, and wrong, as if whatever made them did not move the way a human moves. And then, during a violent November storm, the screaming started. At first, the sound could have been the wind. That is what the family told themselves in those first moments. The way you tell yourself the most reasonable thing when the alternative is too frightening to accept. High winds through old stone can produce sounds that are almost human. But this voice became louder. It became distinct. And then it was inside the castle. It was the voice of a woman in tremendous distress, sobbing and calling out. Mixed into the sobbing were words. Words about demons. Words about the damned, and words about torment. The voice moved through the house and could not be located. No woman could be found. No other source of the noises could be located. Disembodied sounds filled the corridors, pulling people out of sleep and into a terror with no shape they could grasp. Through all of this, the abbey suffered more than anyone. His room became the center of the activity in a way that went beyond the door knockings. It is reported that the abbey was a careful man. Before he left his room each day, he bolted the windows, locked the door, and kept the key secured to his person at all times. He took every precaution a reasonable person could take. None of it made any difference. Every time he returned, his room had been rearranged, the couch overturned, the cushions scattered, the armchair placed on top of his desk. The windows, which he had always bolted shut, were standing wide open. He nailed the windows closed. One time after that, the abbey came back to find them open again. And as if the entity was making a point, the couch cushions were balanced on the outside sill, hanging over the edge as though placed there deliberately. On another occasion, the abbey returned to find every single book in his room thrown on the floor, every book but one. The Holy Bible remained on the shelf untouched, exactly where he had left it. That detail stays with me because that is not random destruction. That is not a poltergeist knocking things over without thought. That is something that understood what it was looking at. Something that knew the difference between an ordinary book and sacred text. And it left the sacred text alone. Like a message saying, I know what that is and I am not touching it. The most violent attack on the abbey came one evening when he was kneeling at his fireplace, stirring the coals. Without warning, a massive surge of water came down the chimney, extinguishing the fire completely, blinding him with flying sparks and covering him in soot and ash. He was not seriously injured, but the intent was unmistakable. Hey podcast listeners, Marianne Pohl here. Something is calling people into the water off the coast of Alaska. They walk in, they don't come back. That's where my brand new Ravens Cove novel, The Tide Weaver, begins, and I promise it only gets darker from there. I'm America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers, and The Tide Weaver is book 6 in the Ravens Cove series. This series takes you from wild Alaskan coastlines to the shadowy swamps of East Texas. You'll encounter ancient curses, headless riders, and evil that has no intention of staying buried. Grab The Tide Weaver now, or start with Book 1, Ravens Cove, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever good books are sold. Back to the show. Monsieur de Manville was not a man who gave up easily. Before turning to the church, he tried everything a practical person would try. He bought 2 watchdogs, reasoning that if something human was responsible for the disturbances, the dogs would find it. The dogs searched the grounds with him and the servants. Once and only once did they stop and bark. Their attention was directed at a thicket in the garden. Their barking quickly turned to whining, and the dogs ran. They refused to return to that spot. A thorough search of the thicket found nothing. Monsieur de Manville appealed to the church. The parish priest was the first to respond. He agreed to spend the night in the castle. In the early hours, he heard what he described as the heavy footsteps of a giant figure descending the main staircase. The following morning, he told the family that he had no doubt the cause was supernatural. Then he left, in a hurry. On January 5, 1876, a more senior clergyman arrived. The Reverend Father H.L., a canon, was sent directly by the bishop. He entered the castle to investigate. And from the moment he crossed the threshold, the castle went completely silent. For 12 days, nothing happened. Not a sound, not a movement, not a single disturbance of any kind. The family could breathe. The abbey could occupy his room without dread. Life returned to normal. On January 15th, the canon performed a religious ceremony in the castle. The exact nature of the ceremony was not recorded, but the intent was clear. He was bringing the full authority of the church to bear on whatever was in that house. He stayed until January 28th. The moment he left, the very moment his carriage pulled away from the castle, a sound came from the first floor passage. A loud noise that sounded like a body falling heavily to the ground. After that came a sound like a rolling ball striking the green room door with tremendous force. The entity had waited. More disconcerting, it had known to wait. And the instant the canon was gone, it announced its return. Formal exorcisms were performed. The family arranged a novena of masses to be said at Lourdes on their behalf. Church officials examined all the evidence and delivered their official assessment. The Haunting of Calvados Castle was, in their words, diabolically supernatural. After each exorcism, there was peace. 2 days, 3 days. And then the noises would begin again, quietly at first, building back to their full intensity, as if something was testing how much it could get away with. The activity continued through the summer and into the autumn of 1876. Madame de Manville, alone in her room one night, while her husband was away, watched the latch on her bedroom door unbolt itself. The door opened slowly, then slammed shut. She was not harmed, but she lay there in the dark, understanding that whatever was in her home could reach her anywhere if it wanted. The servants' rooms were invaded. Auguste and Emile returned to find their belongings thrown about, their beds overturned. All the books and papers in Monsieur de Manville's study were thrown into a heap on the floor. The voice of the unsettled woman returned, joined by new sounds. The growl of animals, a deep bellow like a bull, and drumming with no source. After one particularly violent night in September, Monsieur de Manville opened the doors of the drawing room in the morning to find every piece of furniture had been rearranged during the night. The chairs, the tables, the sofa, all of it reorganized into the shape of a horseshoe, as though a meeting had taken place in the dark. He sat down at his harmonium and played. He played for a long time, filling the rearranged room with music, perhaps trying to reclaim some sense of normality in a house that had stopped feeling like his own. When he finished, the music continued. From the far corner of the room, something played back everything he had just performed, note for note, phrase for phrase. But no instrument stood in that corner, and Monsieur Manville was alone in the room. Monsieur and Madame de Manville sold the castle and left. This account was not published in a tabloid or passed around as local gossip. It was documented in detail by Monsieur de Manville himself, and in 1892 it was published in the Annales des Sciences Chiques, a serious journal of psychical research. The investigators who reviewed it were not credulous thrill seekers. They were scholars, clergy, and trained observers. And what strikes me most, what I keep returning to, is not the violence of the haunting, or even the scale of it, though both were extraordinary. It is the intelligence behind it. This was not random destruction. This was not a force blindly unleashing itself on whoever happened to be nearby. Whatever inhabited Calvados Castle made choices. It chose to focus most of its attention on the man of faith in the house. It chose to throw every book to the floor except the Holy Scriptures. It chose to wait in complete silence for 12 days while a canon from the bishop's office was present, and then chose the exact moment of his departure to resume. It chose to wait out each exorcism and come back. That is not just a haunting. That is a campaign. The Catholic Church looked at all of it, the diary, the witnesses, the evidence, and called it diabolically supernatural. The Church did not call it a ghost or an unexplained phenomenon. They called it what it was, something diabolical, something with intention, strategy, and an awareness of spiritual authority. I write about spiritual warfare in my novels because I believe it is real. I believe that evil is not random. I believe it is organized, intelligent, and purposeful. And I believe that accounts like this one, which were documented, investigated, officially recognized by the Church itself, are not curiosities from another century. They are reminders. The thing that targeted the abbey at Calvados Castle knew exactly what he represented. It knew the difference between his books and his scripture. It knew to go quiet when spiritual authority walked through the door. It understood the battle it was in. The question the Calvados haunting leaves with me is not what it was. The question is whether we understand the battle as clearly as it did.
The supernatural world is closer than we think. Sometimes it chills us. Sometimes it reminds us we were never alone. Two worlds, every single day. And the greatest power against the darkness has always been the light. Stay curious, stay faithful, and never mistake the darkness for the whole story. Thanks for listening. Until next time, may the sun always be on your face, the wind at your back, and the good Lord walk beside you.